While the U.S. economy is recovering for many Americans, Black men continue to experience persistent unemployment gaps and reduced economic opportunity. In recent months, leading economists have touted that the labor market is recovering from the global pandemic and related recession, putting the United States on a path to reaching full employment. In December 2021, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell stated, "The labor market by many measures is hotter than it ever was before the pandemic." One, in many regards, that is true. Unemployment is falling rapidly, dropping to 3.8% in February 2022, which, while still above the pre-pandemic rate of 3.5% too, marks a historic and faster recovery than expected 0.3. Workers across all racial groups have experienced larger declines in their unemployment rate compared with the recovery after the Great Recession in 2008. Yet this economic recovery is revealing the impacts of continuing systemic racism, ageism, and ableism on the labor market. Specifically, many Black men, older and disabled Black men in particular, continue to experience persistent gaps in both employment and economic opportunity. An economy where Black men consistently experience significantly higher unemployment rates than white men cannot be considered as having reached full employment. Likewise, a recovery that does not reach everyone equitably does not bode well for the country's long-term economic health and stability. Many Black men continue to experience persistent gaps in both employment and economic opportunity. In order to address this systemic challenge, this issue brief 1 examines how Black men are excluded from the economy and wealth-building opportunities. 2 considers the intentional policy choices the United States has made to keep Black men outside the financial mainstream. And 3 highlights the promising intersectional policy interventions that are available to increase the number of Black men in the labor force, create good jobs, address wage disparities, and close the racial wealth gap. The COVID-19 pandemic plunged the United States into a deep recession that affected workers and families across the country. However, the impacts of this recession have also revealed the harmful ramifications of long-standing systemic racism on the labor market. During the height of the pandemic-induced recession in April 2020, the unemployment rate reached 14.7%, the highest rate observed since this data collection began in 1948.6. While the unemployment rate for white men during this period was high relative to pre-pandemic levels, at 12.3% in April 2027. Black men's unemployment soared to a high of 16% in June, 22 or 8, a level that has never been reached by white men, 0.9. Notably, during this time, Black men also experienced longer periods of unemployment than white men. 10 in 2021, the typical duration of unemployment among Black men was 20.1 weeks, compared with 16.6 weeks among white men, 0.11. By February 2022, white men's unemployment had dropped all the way to 3%, while Black men's unemployment hovered at more than twice that, at 6.4%. While the decline in Black men's unemployment rate has been faster than that of the Great Recession, racial inequities persist. Fortunately, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security (CARES Act of 2020) expanded the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program 13 to give part-time workers, independent contractors, and gig workers, all jobs in which Black workers are overrepresented, unemployment benefits for the first time, 0.14. However, from April 2020 to June 2020, only 13% of jobless Black workers received these expanded unemployment benefits, compared with 24% of jobless white workers, 0.15. This disparity in access to benefits can be partially attributed to the federal policy decision to allow states to set their own eligibility requirements and benefit amounts. For example, states in the South, the U.S. region with the highest proportion of Black residents, offer, on average, the lowest unemployment insurance benefits of any region in the country. As a result, fewer eligible people of color have received those benefits. These state-level differences have exacerbated poverty and economic hardship for many Black people, resulting in poorer economic outcomes. 16. Furthermore, when Black workers are employed in certain low-income jobs, in roles such as home health care aides or part-time work, their unemployment benefits tend to be smaller, limiting their ability to remain financially stable during an economic crisis. 17. There are far more black men who are jobless than the already high unemployment figures would suggest, further contributing to greater poverty, reduced financial stability, and a lack of generational wealth in black families and communities. Looking solely at the unemployment rate, however, can underestimate the extent of joblessness among black men. After factoring in the disproportionate number of black men and youth who are in carceral settings that are not counted as unemployed and also unable to look for employment, the prime age employment to population ratio gap between black and white male workers is even higher, 18. Simply put, there are far more black men who are jobless than the already high unemployment figures would suggest, 19, further contributing to greater poverty, reduced financial stability, and a lack of generational wealth in black families and communities. Older black men and those with disabilities face some of the greatest barriers to economic security. Importantly, black men are not a homogeneous group, and their experiences differ by age and disability status, among other factors. Black men who are also members of other marginalized groups, such as disabled people or older adults, often experience intersecting and compounding forms of discrimination. Older black men, for example, may experience ageism as well as racism and must deal with the compounding impacts of income and wealth gaps as they age. Indeed, while the increase in early retirements and the large declines in labor force participation among older people are well documented, 20, such trends are not present among older black men specifically. In fact, older black men experienced large increases in labor force participation in 2021, largely because they tend to accumulate less retirement savings and wealth than white men, affecting their ability to retire early. Historic discrimination means that black men have long been left out of the labor market and are overrepresented in low-wage jobs. Almost 250 years of slavery, followed by the failure of Reconstruction and a century of Jim Crow segregation, built the foundation of black suppression and exploitation in the United States, intentionally depriving black people of opportunities to build or pass on wealth. Additionally, policies in the 20th century, such as the exclusion of occupations traditionally held by black men from New Deal programs, discriminatory implementation of the GI Bill, redlining, subprime loans, gerrymandering, and voter suppression compounded the inequities experienced by black individuals and families in employment, housing, voting, and more, further cementing economic disparities that persist to this day. Meanwhile, the overrepresentation of black men, women, and youth in the criminal justice system has had a high cost on the economic mobility of black families and communities across the country for decades. Finally, inequitable access to public services and supports has forced many black communities into enduring cycles of generational poverty and deprivation, 27. As a result of this historical discrimination, black individuals are overrepresented in low-wage jobs and have been left behind in the labor market. The types of jobs typically worked by black men have been affected by the COVID-19 recession, driving the disproportionate economic impact on black workers. The most common occupations held by black men are low-wage jobs compared with those held by white men. In addition, 19% of employed black men work in just their top 5 most common occupations, while about 14% of employed white men work in their top 5 most common occupations. See Figure 3. This kind of clustering in a small number of occupations means that when an economic shock hits, the groups who disproportionately work in the most affected occupations, such as black men, bear the brunt. In 2021, more than 1 in 5 employed black men worked in either leisure and hospitality or wholesale and retail trade 28, jobs that are in person and on the front lines, exposing black families to higher health risks during the COVID-19 pandemic. Moreover, the jobs held by black men not only tend to pay less, but also have limited or no benefits, such as paid family and medical leave, retirement savings, and at-will scheduling. This lack of accommodations and benefits compounded the risks experienced by black workers during the pandemic. Not surprisingly, people of color, and especially the black community, have experienced a disproportionate burden of COVID-19 cases and deaths. 29 of the shock, while groups that are more spread out among occupations, such as white men, are more protected from layoffs. We can talk about this for hours, but everyone knows the reality. Black men are under siege. Historical and current policy decisions have kept black men out of the economic mainstream for far too long, resulting in poor health, social, and economic outcomes for many black men and communities. The United States has a moral obligation to eliminate the barriers that have kept too many black men from fully participating in the workforce and economy. For generations, these barriers have taken a devastating toll on black families and communities, hindering their economic growth and prosperity.